Good afternoon. We're here this afternoon to have a special press conference related to our tourism and our reopening protocols that will commence on July 1st of this year. As you know, pre-cluster, we had announced our exit strategy. And since the cluster have been relegated to the past, we are here to announce updated protocols. And with that said, I will pass over to the Honorable Parliamentary Secretary, responsibility for tourism, to give you an update.
Good afternoon. As stated by the Honorable Acting Premier and Minister of Infrastructure and Tourism, we're here to speak about the reopening protocols. And we understand that there are some concerns and questions throughout the industry, persons traveling to get home. And we hope to address them today. And please feel free to ask your comments on the live, although I cannot look at it throughout the presentation. I will try my best to keep up with questions being asked and respond to them in kind. And I'll now begin the statement. The deployment of several COVID-19 vaccines has opened the way towards conveying population-level reduction in the risk of COVID-19 transmissions around the globe and in Anguilla. In Anguilla, our reopening protocols have always been underscored by the concept of achieving herd immunity, whereby if 70 to 80% of the total population has been fully vaccinated, it will protect others in the community who are unable to vaccinate. As of June 25th, Anguilla has administered 9,276 first doses and over 6,000 second doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine to persons 18 years and older. At a population estimate of 15,500 persons, 60% of the total population has received a first dose, and 44% of the total population has received a second dose, representing less than the previously stated minimum target figure for herd immunity of 70% of the total population. I'll repeat that. At a population estimate of 15,500, 60% of the total population has received a first dose, and 44% of the total population has received a second dose, representing less than the previously stated minimum target figure for herd immunity of 70% of the total population. Additionally, with the global surge of the Delta variant, which is predicted to become the most dominant COVID-19 strain across the US and Europe by early August, we've had to revisit some aspects of our reopening protocol. They are as follows. Testing before arrival. Testing before arrival continues to be required at 3 to 5 days prior to arrival. We are aware of the changes in protocols for persons arriving via Dutch St. Martin. St. Martin, like Anguilla, has their own protocols, and we are not in a position to change or influence their protocols in any way. Additionally, I would want to say for the record, attempts have been made by the government and the governor's office, but we have to respect, another country's protocol in attempts to protect their own citizens. What we can recommend is that persons make their guests and all persons traveling become aware of the requirements of entry for both St. Martin and Anguilla and test accordingly. Testing out of quarantine. Persons arriving who arrived in Anguilla between the 25th and 29th of June will be tested out of quarantine between the 1st and 3rd of July. This is primarily based on our testing capacity. Since we are testing persons out of quarantine and testing on arrival, we would not be able to test persons out of quarantine before the 3rd of July. This is a capacity issue with our testing equipment available. However, I do want to note that this is less than the previously established 7 days required in quarantine. Our July 1st strategy. Our July 1st strategy will begin on 30th June at noon, which means any person entering Anguilla after noon tomorrow will benefit from our July 1st entry strategy. All persons are required to produce a COVID-19 test 3 to 5 days prior to entry and begin their pre-approval process on iVisitAnguilla.com. All visitors 18 years and older to Anguilla are required to be fully vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus at least 3 weeks prior to arrival. The only exemption besides an age exemption will be for pregnant persons. We are also announcing the introduction of on-arrival testing for all arriving passengers. Previously, our entry protocols, which was predicated on a 70% uptake in Anguilla, would have stated that there was no entry tests on arrival. But because of the fact that we are at a 60% uptake in vaccine, there will be an entry test on arrival. This test will not bring about any fees to the person tested, and the person, while waiting for their results, will not be required to stay in place. This is for many reasons. For us to have a data capture of persons upon entry, as well as a second line of defense. Multi-generational families, or families with fully vaccinated persons and unvaccinated persons, which is a mix, will be required to test 3 to 5 days ahead of arrival, a test upon arrival, and a subsequent test on day 4. Between their arrival test and their day 4 tests, they will not undergo any quarantine observations. So to repeat, persons will not be under quarantine from arrival to day 4, but in order to protect those Anguillians who have not yet vaccinated, we will be doing day 4 testing. Unvaccinated residents will be required to produce a COVID-19 test 3 to 5 days prior to arrival, undergo an arrival test, and quarantine for 10 days in an approved accommodation. The fees remain the same. If a person tests positive upon entry to Anguilla, or a person from a group, the protocols will remain the same. And just to remind you, the protocols have always been, if you test positive at any point, you will have to go into quarantine. And if you are traveling with a group, as our protocols have always been, you will be required to isolate. There is a special caveat for unaccompanied minors. The majority of authorized COVID-19 vaccines have not yet been approved for children under the age of 18. Only the Pfizer vaccine has been authorized for children between the ages of 12 to 17 years. Cognizant of the fact that children under 18 still represent a transmission risk to others and are significantly a risk to those who are significantly a risk to unvaccinated children in households and other social contacts. The protocol for unaccompanied children will be as follows. So this is for children who are traveling without an adult companion. They're traveling on their own. A child traveling from a vaccinated household where one or both parents are vaccinated to a local household in Anguilla where the eligible members of that household are vaccinated will not be required to quarantine. A child traveling to or from an unvaccinated household will be required to quarantine, and the usual fees will apply. The Phase 1 exit strategy beginning July 1st also identifies other matters such as festivals. Permit holders for festivals will be required to admit only vaccinated individuals to the festivals. Select public servants and employees of statutory bodies will only be granted travel if they are vaccinated, and work permit holders will be required to vaccinate. I will now pass over to the Minister of Tourism.
Thank you very much, Paul Sek. Thank you very much, Paul Sek. We are fielding questions online, and some persons are asking the questions as it relates to why is it we are asking persons who are fully vaccinated who are coming to our shows after July 1st to test. And like I said online, we are guided by healthcare professionals, and we want to add an additional layer of protection to the citizenry of Anguilla. So that is why we have moved towards testing on arrival. As the Parliamentary Secretary said, we have not yet reached herd immunity. And even though we have not yet reached herd immunity, we are still sticking to the July 1st reopening protocols. At the very outset, we had said that these protocols can change. The date of reopening can change, but we have stuck to the date of reopening while the protocols have changed, have been amended slightly. It is not a huge deviation away from where we were before. As we all know, any persons who would be traveling to Anguilla before July 1st would have to stay in place, would have to be quarantined for a particular period of time. We have gotten it moved to at least noon of the 30th of June, where persons who have come to our shows can be tested out on the 1st of July and be able to enjoy the amenities that Anguilla has to offer. So this is very fluid. There are instances where we will have to change our protocols, we'll have to change our modus operandi based on what is transpiring on the ground. We have the new variant, the Delta variant, that is posing a tremendous havoc on even the United Kingdom. And as you can see, the United Kingdom had just recently changed their protocols. So we are guided by not only the local healthcare professionals. I know on many of our instances we are praising our healthcare team, our medical team, for protecting the well-being of the people of Anguilla. And we too want to join in giving them all the praises. At the end of the day, we are guided by them as well. And anything that we do as it relates to our testing protocols and the regulations and the like, we are advised by them and we stick by their advice because, as you know, I am no medical professional. And I don't think the Parliamentary Secretary is any medical professional, but we have to be able to find a balance between good public health practice and also allowing persons to come to the island and enjoy all of the amenities that we have to offer. This is a huge change from where we were before. As you know, before we had a bubble concept. We're evolving away from the bubble concept, but there's no telling that there might be that one person who have been fully vaccinated and may enter Anguilla, and on day 4, show up positive, then we'll have to conduct the contact tracing and the like, and things can change. So everything is fluid. We are hoping for the best. We are doing as much as we can to ensure that there's a measure of economic activity while protecting the health and well-being of our citizens.
There was a question about returning residents where there's a vaccinated adult and an unvaccinated minor or child. As the previous protocols would have stated, no quarantine would apply here. The previous protocols more or less remain the same, except with the caveat of testing persons upon entry. That is a step to protect Anguilla, as we have not yet reached our 70 to 80% herd immunity mark. We do recognize that this is a small change, but it's to primarily ensure the Anguillians who have not yet vaccinated and the Anguillians who cannot vaccinate are protected. What we also recognize, or we want to state for the record, is that vaccinated persons can still be carriers of the virus, as we always knew. And that is also one of the reasons why we have introduced entry tests on arrival. But because persons are coming with a test that they would have taken 3 to 5 days prior to arrival, they would have been vaccinated. Their tests upon arrival will not require them to stay in place, because the risk that they pose would be significantly less than a person who is not vaccinated.
We are trying to, you have to bear with us, we're trying to balance the questions that are coming online while we speak to you. There's a question about the turnaround time in terms of the application process. Steve Barrymore, you want to answer the question from Steve Barrymore?
Sorry, I can't see the question,
Okay.
but
The question is, if you can't send us approval after we follow the testing protocols, are you going to refuse entry to tourists who do not get approvals back on time?
I don't understand.
I don't fully understand the question.
There is another question though. When traveling with family, who needs to get tested on day 4? Just anyone who is unvaccinated, i.e. the child, or all family members who have already pre-tested arrival tests and are vaccinated? So vaccinated members of the family may be tested on day 4, but unvaccinated members of the family will be tested on day 4.
And I also want to add to this, one of the things that I don't think that we can afford is another lockdown. And it's better to err on the side of caution. And even when we had the bubble and persons were subjected to the bubble and guided movements, visitors to our shows enjoy Anguilla. They enjoyed Anguilla immensely, even with the bubble. So here we are evolving to the point where persons can rent a vehicle, can do horseback riding, can move around the island relatively freely. So we are just asking persons to be patient based on what is happening around the world. We are moving to uncharted waters. There's still a lot of unknowns. And as we move along slowly, we'll be able to capture that data and know how we can move to the next step of our reopening.
There is a question about herd immunity and why it's based on the entire population and not the number of adults who can be vaccinated. Now, I will say that we don't have the health team present with us today, and that's a question that I would have preferred the health team to respond to and give scientific reasonings. But I will say, in short and simply put, the entire population can contract the virus. So protection will be predicated on the entire population. We know when we had the cluster outbreak, we had a 7-month-old baby who would have contracted COVID-19. So in order to have proper herd immunity, the entire population is taken into consideration, not just the adult population.
I want to answer a question about a resident of Anguilla who is fully vaccinated and who is leaving Anguilla for medical reasons. And the question is, on his return to Anguilla, what are the procedures? The procedures simply a negative PCR, RT-PCR test 3 to 5 days before returning to Anguilla. And once you arrive in Anguilla, You'll be given a test on arrival, and then with the negative test, you won't be subjected to any form of quarantine. I hope that answers your question.
There is a question for clarification purposes and to understand exactly what are the updates. The two major updates would be that there'll now be, the three major updates would be that there'll now be an entry test for all persons with no fee and no quarantine between the wait time for the results. There may be a day 4 test for persons who fit a certain category, but I will say that was always in our protocols. Subsequent testing was always in our protocols for us to keep our finger on the pulse and understand where persons are at and if they are in a position to transmit the virus. And the third major update is that unaccompanied minors will, and that's persons traveling without an adult. So any person under 18 traveling without an adult must show two conditions to avoid quarantine, and that would be that they are coming from a home where the eligible persons in that home have been vaccinated, and they're going to a home where the eligible persons in that home have been vaccinated. If one or two of those conditions have not been met, they will undergo quarantine. This one is more an update for clarification purposes for persons who are sending their children to Anguilla, perhaps even to meet with family members and grandparents and such. They wanted to have a clearer idea of the protocol, so I wanted to bring it out more clearly. But the only new update in essence would be that there will be a test upon arrival.
The questions are coming in fast and furious. A number of the questions are related to the portal, and whether in terms of people who are visiting our shows within the next few days and the response time. I can tell you that they're working overtime on the portal, and they'll be getting back to you very shortly. As a matter of fact, we'll be increasing the capacity in terms of the authorization for entry into Anguilla. Do you know which date that is?
Okay, so there's a question about how the portal works. Anybody trying to enter into Anguilla, we recommend that you apply a minimum of 24 to 48 hours. So we have always recommended that persons apply at least a week before arrival, just to make the arrival process smoother even on your end. And then you upload your PCR test 3 to 5 days prior to arrival. So you can apply on the portal without even having your PCR test in hand. That is perfectly fine, and in fact, it is recommended. One of the things I also want to point out is that if you have a change in date, for example, there's a cancellation, perhaps weather-related and otherwise, and you have to change your date, there is a messaging portion on the portal where we just ask you to message us and let us know what is your new date, and we will advise whether or not you need to retest or what you can do to enter into the island for your new date. We are very responsive, but as more traffic hits the portal, it may take a little time to get back to each and every one of the persons, but our concierge agents are working around the clock. The time that they are requested to work is from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and I have seen them work overtime 3 in the morning, 11 in the evening, 5 in the morning. So we are very responsive. We just need you to let us know what you are requiring. So once you apply on the portal, you'll receive a response that gives you an application number. Your initial approval is given to you once you upload your PCR test. You don't receive any further communication before uploading your PCR test. And once your PCR test is in the portal, rest assured that you will receive a response.
The questions are coming in fast and furious. There's a question about persons traveling to St. Martin for the day. Palsek, you want to explain the question, that question? I mean, yeah.
You can go ahead.
Okay, so the question is about persons traveling to St. Martin for the day. Now, the thing is that you have to, from the destination that you're emanating from, you have to submit a negative test from that destination. So it's very difficult to travel to Anguilla from Anguilla for a day to St. Martin and return on that same day. However, if you're in St. Martin and you want to visit Anguilla, let's say for Eyes Wide Shut, you upload your negative RT-PCR test 3 to 5 days before coming to Anguilla, and you go through the portal www.ivisitangwilla.com, and once you're approved, you come into Anguilla on the day or the day before or whatever day you choose to come to Anguilla, and you enjoy the festivity, and you can return on the very same day. The difficulty with traveling to St. Martin and return on the very same day is the way the testing process is, and the fact that our neighboring island have a number of variants that that is quite worrisome. And as I said before, we need to protect not only our citizens, but there are persons among us, including children and pregnant women, who cannot be vaccinated. And we also need to protect those persons, because we all know that the Delta variant still impacts those persons who are fully vaccinated. If you have 1 dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Delta variant can still impact you up to 60%. And if you have 2 doses, if you have 1 dose, it only gives you about 30% coverage with the Delta variant. And with 2 doses, it gives you up to 60%. So the reality is that there's still a 40% chance that you can contract COVID-19, the Delta variant. And then you may not get sick, but you may give that to one of your children. Your children go to school, and next thing you know, we have a super spreader event. So all we're doing, we're trying to balance good economics with good public health policy. And like I said before, we are guided by the healthcare professionals. They give us their advice, and we follow their advice. Their advice have not failed Anguilla yet. We are right now at level 1. We have no COVID cases in Anguilla. We have 0 COVID cases in Anguilla. We're one of the few destinations in the world that can boast that. And it's all because of the advice of the health team that have advised us. And they have been doing this for well over a year. And we take their advice and we will run with their advice. And while that is the case, we are still allowing the opportunity for all of us to be able to have some economic activity on island while persons enjoy the amenities that Anguilla has to offer.
There's a question about whether or not we can confirm whether Walgreens or CVS tests will be accepted. And I don't think that we can at this point, because we would need to know what sort of test that they're doing. But when you apply on the portal, you get a very comprehensive breakdown of what is requested of your RT-PCR tests. And if you look at that, which is why we recommend applying at least 7 days prior to arrival, so that you can have an idea of what test is required for the to be accepted as the RT-PCR test in Anguilla. And then you can take that to whether it is your doctor or other pharmacists or other places where the tests are available, to ensure that they meet up with what is expected. I was told that there's certain CVS tests that meet our requirements, but it is up to the person who is traveling to ensure that that particular test is a test that they receive based on what the plethora of options will be.
And I just want to reiterate that I know persons may find that our protocols may be a little strict, but understand the status in which we find ourselves today. And the status in which we find ourselves today is due to our strict protocols. And when persons have lost loved ones or see not even being able to see their loved ones suffering in a hospital bed, then you can appreciate how it is that we are living in Anguilla today, where even though we have a mask mandate for public gatherings, we have no cases of COVID in Anguilla. And that did not come from no small feat. That came not only from the advice of the health team and us as a political directorate following the advice of the health team, but also the citizens of Anguilla following the advice and following the protocols that we have laid out to the general public. So the people of Anguilla have braved this, and we are asking our visitors and those persons who want to visit our shows to understand, appreciate, and we know that some of us are coming from destinations that there's in some cases widespread COVID, but we cannot afford that. We cannot afford our loved ones dying from COVID-19, and so we need to ensure that we protect our citizens at all costs. And even though we have evolved to this point where on July 1st we'll be allowing for fully vaccinated persons to come to our shows without having to quarantine, we do that knowing that there's a risk involved, and we have to decide whether or not that risk is something that we want to embark upon to allow you to enjoy us while we having some measure of economic activity. So we must be able to balance the risk with the economics and the protocols that you may find a little difficult. But it is something that we have taken on board. We have had several meetings, several executive councils, including one today. And here we are today unveiling our protocols to you, the general public, and to those who are visiting our shows. So we are hoping that you would understand why is it we are doing what we are doing, and appreciate the fact that we are a small country with limited resources. We don't have the capacity to handle more than 10 persons who are ill from the COVID-19 virus. We just recently came out of a cluster where 3 persons were placed in that isolation ward, and just a little bit more and we would have been overrun. So we're asking you to understand our present situation, the situation that we find ourselves in as a small country.
There is a question about day trips to Anguilla, and I'm particularly saying that St. Martin's can come over to Anguilla and have day trips. And the reality is anybody can come to Anguilla and do a day trip, because there's no requirement to stay in Anguilla at a particular point in time after entry. You can come into Anguilla, for example, tomorrow. Once you meet our entry requirements, come into Anguilla and then leave. It's because at that point you'd have had a test 3 to 5 days prior to arrival, a test upon arrival, and then leave the following day. That is why anybody can be a day tripper to Anguilla. But when you go to another country, you have to then follow the protocols to re-enter into Anguilla that anybody will have to undergo. So if you go to St. Martin, it will be the same as if you are going to Florida, or if you're going to Puerto Rico, or if you're going to another Caribbean island. It is not that the protocol is backwards. It is just that we don't have any stipulations on when a person can exit Anguilla. Because so long as they don't need onward testing from us, we play no role in their will and ability to leave the island.
The question is being asked about proof that someone is pregnant.
So we have been doing that thus far, where persons who are pregnant will just be required to send a doctor's note. And because pregnancy in our protocol is considered as a medical exemption, so once you have a note from your doctor confirming your pregnancy, you'd be able to enter into the island. The masking protocol will be extended to July 31st in the first instance, while we try to meet herd immunity.
Yeah, there's a question. CVS is the largest pharmacy chain in the US and possibly in the world. It offers one test labeled a PCR test. For many of us, even in urban centers, that is our only option. So it would create chaos if the test is not accepted. CVS does offer rapid tests, and it is well explained on the Anguilla side that this rapid test is not accepted. So I think it is what we're asking for. We're asking for our RT-PCR test. Is abbreviation for.
I can't.
Yes, I can't pronounce it. But yeah, and that's what it is. Yes, from my understanding, the RT-PCR test and a PCR test is somewhat different. A lot of people have been asking about the PCR test that CVS offers.
There was also a question on if a vaccinated returning resident can forego the pre-arrival test and test upon arrival instead. Right now, we are guided by regulations, and those regulations are very strict, and tight, where if a person is entering into Anguilla, regardless of their status of being a resident or a visitor, they must test 3 to 5 days prior to arrival.
Another question is asked about vaccinations. And for example, the CoronaVac is being administered in Brazil. I'm not familiar with the CoronaVac. But from my understanding, Paul, second, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the vaccines that we are accepting are those that are acceptable in the United Kingdom. That would be the Oxford, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson.
Yes. Right. To confirm what the minister said, the tests on, the vaccines must be UK MHRA approved vaccines. And so we previously were operating on a list of vaccines, approved vaccines as administered by the WHO, but we are seeing that there's breakthrough transmission with certain vaccines and the efficacy rate being a bit too low for our comfort and our position as a country. So we've resorted to accepting the UK MHRA approved vaccines.
Okay, the question is a little unclear about the CVS non-rapid PCR tests and whether it's accepted, because most persons who are traveling is waiting to be viewed, on
the portal.
On the portal.
Okay, so
just to clarify, the CVS test is indeed a RT-PCR. If once it's a RT-PCR test, it'll be approved.
What I was saying about the CVS and Walgreens tests is that I cannot sit here and tell you that all tests administered by pharmacies and other boutique properties would be accepted by Anguilla. What I am saying is that we accept only the RT-PCR tests. When you apply, there's a list of requirements that's given to you so you can know exactly what the RT-PCR test means. So it means that you can't do rapid tests, you can do antigen tests and such. So what I am saying is that if it is that the RT-PCR test is available at CVS, Walgreens and such, and they meet the requirements as given by the portal, you can definitely use them. But I do not think that I am in a position to advise anyone on where in the US or other countries that they can find the tests. But I've seen persons commenting based on their own experiences that they have applied to the portal with the RT-PCR tests available to them, made available to them from pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens. And if that is the case and the tests are the same, then I could recommend that you utilize them. However, I cannot give a blanketed statement that all tests administered by certain businesses will be the accepted test in Anguilla. I hope that that's a bit clearer.
Another question is asking whether or not unvaccinated persons will be allowed in Anguilla. Unvaccinated residents of Anguilla will be allowed in Anguilla. They'll be subjected to a mandatory quarantine, but unvaccinated residents and belongers of Anguilla will be allowed entrance into Anguilla. However, if you're a visitor into Anguilla, you must be vaccinated, and you must be fully vaccinated in order to enter Anguilla. There's a question about why is it someone in Boston who was saying that people are going about their business in Boston, and why is it people have to be tested on arrival after the 1st of July? And we had spoken about that earlier, and that is to ensure the safety of the citizens in Anguilla, because we know that persons who are fully vaccinated, there is that chance that they can still contract COVID-19.
Somehow I think we managed to to get through the questions on the portal, on the Facebook Live, and I'm just giving a final review just to see. There is a person who is asking about having a negative test but not having a response time. I would recommend that they message the government's Facebook page, and then I would personally see to it that their particular
responded to.
approval requirement is responded to.
And there's another question about someone who has tested negative prior to coming to Anguilla and test positive on arrival. That person will be, as the parliamentary secretary indicated earlier, that person will be placed in isolation.
So I believe that we are bringing this to a close, and I will just repeat some of the more important information. You can apply to enter Anguilla on iVisitAnguilla.com. All persons are required to produce a negative COVID test 3 to 5 days prior to arrival. All visitors 18 and older to Anguilla will be required to be fully vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus. The only exemption, apart from persons under 18, would be the exemption for pregnant women. As it relates to returning residents can come to the island if they are unvaccinated, but they will undergo a 10-day quarantine. Multi-generational families with fully vaccinated persons and unvaccinated, either children or pregnant persons, will be required to produce a test 3 to 5 days prior to arrival. All persons will be tested upon arrival, and unvaccinated persons may also receive a day 4 test. Persons with full evidence of COVID vaccination, of the COVID-19 vaccination, will be governed by the UK MHRA approved vaccines. Unaccompanied minors will be required to show if they're traveling from and to a household where all persons are vaccinated. If they meet this requirement, then there'll be no fees, no quarantine. If the home that they are traveling to or from contains adults who are not vaccinated, they will be required to quarantine for the protection of our younger persons in Anguilla who have not yet had access to the COVID-19 vaccination. As it relates to festivals, permit holders will only have approved activities if it admits only fully vaccinated persons. And just for clarification, when we say fully vaccinated persons, it means 3 weeks after your final dose has been administered. Our July 1st protocols will begin on June 30th at midday. So anybody coming into the country tomorrow on the 30th, after midday, your entry tests, once you receive your entry test, you'll be able to roam freely, similar to a person coming on July 1st. I believe.
I just want to answer the question on the mask mandate until July 31st. So the question is, where will the mask have to be wear? The mask will have to be wear everywhere. Sorry? Worn. Sorry. I wasn't even listening to myself. The mask will have to be worn everywhere. Wherever you are, you'll have to wear the mask. Of course, you can't wear the mask while you're eating or drinking at a restaurant. But that is what the mask mandate suggests or states.
I want to mention something that I would have mentioned in the House this morning. Countries like Israel and other countries that would have been really ahead of the game as it relates to vaccination are realizing that with this Delta variant, they have to reinstate mask wearing. So because of the variant and the little knowledge that we have as a global community on this Delta variant, for the protection of yourselves and others, we are asking that you be masked. Now, if you're going to the beach, no, you're not expected to be masked because you'll be in the water. So that would be an unexpected situation. But when you're traveling in close quarters, outside of familial spaces, these are places where you need to prioritize masking to ensure that you protect yourself and others.
Yeah, so you just answered one of the questions, whether or not persons have to be wearing masks while they're at the beach in the water.
And one of the information that would have come from the CDC, no, I would say that this has not come from our Ministry of Health, and if I will correct myself if I'm wrong. One of the things that they look at is if you're outdoor and you have the ability to social distance, you don't necessarily need to have a mask. So things like, taking a leisurely walk by yourself or with the person that you live with on a beachfront on the shoreline. No one is going to run you down and ask you for a mask. But in particular instances, like when you're traveling through in transit at our ports, when you're in enclosed areas where you cannot social distance, church, conferences, things like that, areas like that is where you would be required to wear a mask.
Just quickly too, I just want to reiterate that at present we have 9,276 persons that have had their first dose of the vaccine, and 6,801 persons that have taken their second dose. And a question was asked about whether or not persons who are receiving their first dose now, given the fact that our final batch are expiring on July 31st, whether or not they'll be able to receive a second dose. We have received confirmation from the British government that we will indeed honor those persons who have received their first dose, and we'll be given enough vaccines to cover for those second doses. It's quite unfortunate that we'll be throwing away quite a significant amount of vaccines at the end of this month, because there's a lot of persons, and I really want to thank all of those persons who have been vaccinated. Like I said, over 9,000 persons have had their first dose, over 6,800 persons have had their second dose. That is something that we should be applauded for, and we are hoping that everyone who have received their first dose can go out and receive their second dose. And we're getting close to that magical number in terms of herd immunity, and we are a leader. We are a leader not only in the Caribbean, but also in the world in terms of vaccination uptake. And yes, it is, we have to learn how to coexist with COVID, but we're not there yet. We're just not there yet. And at some point in time, we just don't know when, we will get there.
Okay, thanks, Julian. So thank you for tuning in to this Government of Angola Live. I know there's a lot of misinformation circulating out there. I do want to reiterate that the only major change that we have outside of our previously published protocols that was in circulation from March or April of this year is that persons arriving to the country as of tomorrow will undergo an entry test, and that is it. So there's still no fees, no quarantines available, no quarantine. And as previously stated, if you come to Angola, arrive to Angola, and you test positive on arrival, the protocol remains the same as it has always been. If you're traveling with the group will remain in isolation. That has not changed. And if you are positive, you will go into quarantine. That as well has not changed.
And there's one other change that we probably have announced, that persons who arrive on the 30th, in the afternoon of the 30th, will be allowed to join those persons who arrive on the 1st. And that is a significant change because previously persons who arrived prior to July 1st would have to remain in place for the duration, for a particular amount of time. And now those persons can enjoy the amenities that Angola has to offer starting on July 1st. So we're evolving and we will continue to evolve, but like I said earlier, this is fluid. Things can change in a matter of a positive test. So we have to be vigilant. Everybody in Angola has to be vigilant. We are moving to the next step of our reopening protocols, where persons who have tested negative on arrival, who are fully vaccinated, will be allowed to move around the island freely without any restrictions. They will be able to rent vehicles. They'll be able to visit any restaurant in Angola. So everybody in Angola, all of us have to remain vigilant. We have to treat everybody with respect, but at the same time, not lowering our guard, because if you lower our guard, we can end up in a situation where we'll have to impose certain restrictions again, and we don't want to go back. We want to move forward. And at every juncture, we are continuing to move forward. Every step, we are continuing to move forward. And even with the recently arrested cluster, we continue to move forward. So I don't know if there's any other questions, Palsek? So, but we'll be back. We'll be back time and time again. Later this afternoon, Her Excellency the Governor and I will be issuing a joint address as it relates to the next phase of our reopening, and tune in for that, and continue to tune into the Government of Anguilla's Facebook page and the Government of Radio Anguilla 95.5 FM for updates as we move forward in the next step of our opening protocols. Palsek? Thank you.